The obvious thing to start with is getting you to reflect on the High Voltage event.
Well, it was a great event, I think, in the sense that the audience were fantastic, really enthusiastic, and the band were in pretty good shape, I think, really. We did have a tremendous amount of technical problems up on stage, and I'm afraid it was our own people, and so I can't really complain about it. It's just one of those things that it's very difficult doing a one-off show in isolation like that. And we had a tremendous amount of technical problems. But having said that, my lasting memory of the show was that it was good and that people enjoyed it. And the band played well despite the problems. And I think that's my real recollection of it.
Well, the fans that attended it said they were particularly moved by your commitment and your delivery at the event. Describe the attitude you went into it with.
It's hard to describe to you, but certainly for many years now, I've considered performing live almost a privilege. It's just something that you never know when the last time will come, and so I do every show really as if it will be the last show, and because it may be. I hope it's not, but one always is aware of the fact that there will come a time when it won't be possible anymore, or the band won't all be assembled, or whatever. So it's with a sense of gratitude, underlying gratitude, that I perform now. The other thing is that I've learnt throughout my lifetime in music that the commitment really is what it's about. If it's the same with anything in life. You get out what you puts in, if you put a lot of commitment into it, the chances are that it'll be good. The result will be good. So I try and put as much feeling, and I try and prepare the music as well as I possibly can.
Now, even despite the technical challenges, what would you point to as the highlights of the show for you?
It's very hard to say, because in many ways it was a struggle. So it was sort of struggling from one song to the next in a way, and performing them with as much feeling as possible, despite what was happening around me. So it wasn't like, there was a great moment, of sort of magical clarity. It was really a tough gig to play. And so I don't know if I could answer that one honestly. I mean, just my overall feeling is I remember how enthusiastic and how glad the crowd were to see us perform. That feeling was unmistakable, and that was a tremendous feeling of bonding and a depth of friendship almost that, those people, a lot of them anyway, had grown up with ELP and its music.
Well, speaking of bond, how would you describe the chemistry between the three of you after so many years away from the group?
ELP is like a family, We played so many shows together over the years that we've become more or less, it is a family of people. I mean, our families are all integrated. We know, all of our families know each other. It is really just like a family, like any other family.
So you picked up where you left off chemistry-wise? In a way,
as soon as the band started playing, it just felt as though not a day had passed.
Now, Carl, I'm sure you read some of the snippy interviews he gave leading up to the concert, where he literally said in an interview a few days before he fully expected everyone to be at each other's throats immediately.
I don't know why Carl has propensity to dwell on negative issues. It's something that I've never really fully understood. You know, my thing and Keith's thing really now is to treasure each other, actually, to value each other and to treasure each other, because, you know, that is really what it's all about. Keith and I had our differences over the years, but we certainly put them behind us and just forgot about them. And to be honest, I get on with Keith now, and we get on together better than we ever did. And I'm just sort of waiting for Carl to reach that point of wisdom in his life where he also realizes that, you know, carrying around grudges from the past or stuff like that really is the problem with all that is that it is you yourself who pays the price. You know, it's the person carrying the burden which always pays the price. So I know that he has got some feelings like that, but there's not much I can do about it for him, really. He's got to reason that through for himself.
So what doors has this event opened for future ELP work?
We haven't made any plans to do any more concerts, but, you know, the door is always open, and one would have to say, if Carl reaches a point in his life where he feels more at peace with himself, really, then perhaps I could see it being possible. I would certainly do it, and so would Keith.
Now, you told me in San Francisco last we spoke that you were working on new music with Keith, and that it could potentially either be for a duo album with Keith, or it could actually be music for ELP. What's your sense of that at this moment?
Keith and I have been doing some writing for some while now, and we've amassed quite a lot of new material. I mean, at some point, right now we're taking a break because we haven't had a break for some while, but we then do Japan and Europe as the duo show. But at some point we will start to record. We will make a decision then about, you know, what to do, I suppose. I think new material is always good. It's always good. It's always something that, you know, there's nothing quite like a new work of art, a new piece of work that's been created. There's an excitement about it. It's new and it's fresh, and, you know, and I think that in our lives maybe we haven't done enough of that lately. So it's something that, you know, I think that it's time we did turn our attention to.
Now, High Voltage, the festival, posted what they call the first new ELP recording in 12 years called Touch and Go 2010. What can you tell me about how this new version came about? What happened was Touch and Go got used in a film. I've just forgotten the title of it. It'll come back to me in a minute. It's just come out. It's a new movie that just came out, and it got used in this film. And so I think what happened is the promoters of the festival thought that it would be a good topical thing to bring it out, and so we did a new sort of remix on it, re-recorded a few different parts with it, and just put a new remix version out. There's some of the original recording on there, and actually some new tracks as well. So it was kind of we would call it a remix, I think. Well, I mean, the only ELP recording of Touch and Go was on the box set, wasn't it?
There was one by Emerson, Lake of Palmer on the box set. The original, of course, was with Cozy Powell.
Which track is this a remix of?
This is a remix of the Emerson, Lake of Palmer version.
You just said you felt that the guitar was a token instrument in ELP. I'm going to disagree with you on that and say that there are some guitar highlights from ELP's career. But I'm curious what your take is on what those highlights are.
Well, you know, look, playing guitar for me is it's what I started doing when I was a young man. It's what I grew up doing, and really, the guitarist in me never died. It never went away, you know. And to this day, I cannot walk past a guitar shop without going in, you know. So me and guitars are married, you know. It'll never leave me. And so I love playing guitar, but I learned to love playing bass too. And so I really do love both instruments in a different way. Playing guitar in ELP is the only difficulty is, of course, that when I put down the bass, there's no bass player, and so you've got that to deal with. And so my guitar sort of contributions are more on recordings. It's easier on recordings, and so that's probably what you're referring to as things like, you know, Carnival 9, the use of guitars there, or the guitar solos I would play in my acoustic songs, things like that. They're the things that, and my use of the acoustic guitar, those are the things which I love to do.
Can you recall what electric guitar you used on Carnival 9?
I believe it was a Zematis, custom built, you know, and so I never had a model number at that time.
Now, I would think guitar is critically important in the songwriting phase for ELP.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the more song-orientated things, yeah. Certainly in all the acoustic songs I wrote were written on acoustic guitar. And some of the more riff-orientated things would have maybe come from guitar or had a guitar influence in them.
Well, from a creative process capacity as it relates to the guitar, I mean, would you often create demos on guitar and vocal and present them to Keith and Carl, or how might that work?
No, because usually what would happen, I would write complete songs with guitar. I would just have the complete song, and or if in the case I wrote with P. Sinfield, we would have the completed song that had been written on guitar, and then we would perhaps make a quick recording of it, and then, but usually I'd just play it live for everybody, you know, and we took it like that. The other way we would work is Keith would write music, and then we would craft a song around part of the melody that he had written. Or Keith would write a melody, and then that would be the basis of a song. So those were the two ways that music really came about for ELP.
On stage, I understand you're only using a Sadowski preamp. Can you tell me how you use it? I've got a Sadowski preamp running into the Mezzo Boogie stuff. I basically use active and passive at times. Actually, on the high voltage, I didn't bother to use the active stuff just because the traditional sort of passive sound was fine, you know. I like that old traditional jazz bass tone. Obviously, we have guitarists and bassists taking out military levels of effects out there these days. Describe your preference for something so minimal.
It's hard to put your finger on it, really. It is there is a sort of balance, I suppose, throughout the tone spectrum, where, for instance, when you play an active bass, you get this wiry type of top on it, and you know, it's like looking at something under a microscope. It's fantastic when you look at something under a microscope, but you wouldn't want to live your whole life looking at everything under a microscope. It's better sometimes to stand back and enjoy the view. And I think with the traditional passive-sounding bass, especially the quality ones, you know, Fender Jazzes, I've also got a Gibson EB2, beautiful. The depth of it is remarkable. And I suppose it is just, that's a pretty good way of talking about it. You know, active is really like looking at something through binoculars or a microscope where everything's so up in your face and pristine and sharp and present, you know, whereas the traditional bass sound, the passive sound, is a panoramic view of a bass sound, which I tend to like more. The tones are more balanced in it, and if you get it set up right, you can, just by the way you pick the strings, you can make it attack more or less, or use your fingers to soften it, or dampen the bass to make it tighter. It's so controllable.
Would you say ultimately that the key to your sound and your tone is really just in your fingers and the instrument?
Largely. And, it's a funny thing. I sometimes tell this story. When I was a very young man, I was playing guitar. I was at the Speakeasy one night, and I jammed. There was a sort of jam going on, and it was Donovan, the singer, Donovan, and he was singing away, and I was playing guitar. And Jeff Beck came up to me, and he said, "Oh, when this next song's finished, could I come and play?" So I said, "Sure, Jeff, yeah." And so we did the next song, and then Jeff picked up the guitar that I was playing. I think it was a Telecaster, and it wasn't my guitar; it belonged to somebody else. But I gave it to him. He picked it up, and immediately he played it. It sounded totally different, but he hadn't touched anything. He didn't touch the controls on the guitar or the amp or anything. Just picked up the guitar and started playing. But his sound was totally, as it is, individual to him. And it's like, but it's the touch, as they say. I asked Hank Marvin. I asked Hank about his sound, because all the great guitar players that I ever met used to all of them would acknowledge Hank as being one of the great, sound people with guitar. They would always try and emulate that sound, And I asked Hank one day, I said, tell me something, Hank, because we all bought the Vox amp, and we all got the Stratocaster and the Binson Echo Chamber. I said, but you know what, no matter how hard we tried, everybody tried, nobody could quite get it right. Nobody could quite get that sound right. I said, what was the secret of it? And he said, Greg, there was no secret. He said, the only thing I can think of is when I started playing guitar, for the first year I played it, I held the plectrum the wrong way round. I held it as if I was writing with a pen. And then after about a year, a friend of mine came up to me and he said, Hank, you've got that all wrong. That's not the way you hold a plectrum. And he showed me the right way to do it, Hank said. And he said, but the problem was I'd got so much into the habit of holding it like a pen, I never quite got into the right way of playing with a pick. So I had this sort of half and half style. It was half like it should be and half like a pen. And so he said, maybe that is something to do with the tone, But other than that, nothing. Nothing to say. I just switched it, unplugged it in, and that was my tone. I think it is a question of the touch.
When you do use an electric guitar, what are the one or two instruments you choose to reach for, and why?
Oh, well, all the classics, I mean, I've got, I love Stratocasters, of course, for the reasons that we all do. I've got a Gretsch 6120, 1959. I just love, it just screams rock and roll. It's got that beautiful country and western, twang to it. And with the Bixby, lovely. I've got a Les Paul, as everybody does, Telecaster, another guitar. I mean, I love all the guitars, all the famous guitars, for the characteristics which they are known for. And I've probably got one of everything, just because I love being able to pick up a Telecaster and hear that beautiful crashing rhythm sound that you get with them, fantastic. And then, the other thing I love with Stratocasters, if you get a sort of 59 Strat, it's great for soloing, whereas the 60s ones are more great for rhythm and chord stuff. So there's sort of hybrids as well as just, I mean, a Strat could be one of a lot of things. I mean, I've got 2 or 3 Strats, and they're all completely different.
What can you tell me about your preference for the Fender 62 Jazz bass and the Sadowski you use?
The original Fender 62, or 60s or 62s, it is just the whole combination of the design, the neck size. If you're playing any ELP, I have to cover a lot of different playing parts, some of them very fast. So if you get something like Tarkus, it's shifting along at quite a speed. So, a big neck like a Precision would be too slow, too awkward to run around fast. The jazz neck, on the other hand, is nippy and quick, and I can be around it fairly quickly. And yet, the jazz bass has still got beautiful, resonant low end, I believe the 60s basses had if I'm not wrong, an ash body. I could be wrong, but I believe they had an ash body and a slab board neck. They all just basically, all in all, they added up to near perfection of a bass guitar. It's a job to find a way to think of improving a Fender 60s jazz bass. Very, very hard. And when I went to Roger Sadowski, and I said to him, Roger, I played one of his basses some years back. And I said, I just loved it when I played it. It was just so accurate, and I actually had one for a little bit. And I said, I would love you to make me one, just the absolute last word in bass guitars, because the little improvements that can be made, he did make, and his guitars, or the one I've got, is just, it's got a Brazilian rosewood neck. It's, the electronics, of course, are fantastic. The bridge, assembly is I'm certain it is better sound-wise. It's more solidly rooted, to the guitar. Generally speaking, everything is just a little bit better, of course, with the hindsight of 40 years, Technology allows you to do things that little bit better. But Roger would never, I'm sure, deny where that design of that guitar originated from. And we never, try and deny that. It's just, but it is a Sadowski version of a Fender jazz bass, which is, by the way, a fantastic instrument. Just fantastic. Really beautiful thing to play. It is the Steinway of, in my view, a Sadowski bass is a Steinway of basses.
Really curious about your experience working with The Who on Real Good Looking Boy.
Yeah, but you see, I work with Roger quite frequently because we do this Teenage Cancer Trust. They do every year they have this concert for the Teenage Cancer Trust, and up until recently, I've been doing quite a lot of those with Roger. So we knew each other very well from those. And so one day I got a call from Roger, and he said, "Look, he was talking to Pete, and he said, I wonder if you would mind coming in and playing on this song we've got called Good Looking Boy." And so I went in and played with them. It is remarkable because, for all that, because I knew all of The Who during my lifetime, Keith Moon and John Entwistle and everything, and they were fantastic characters and fantastic musicians. People tend to forget sometimes just how good John Entwistle was as a bass player. He was fantastic, And Keith also as a drummer, apart from the clowning around and the mad stuff, he could play those drums, And so that was fantastic. But when you work with Pete and Roger, you definitely know where the sound of the Who really comes from, because Pete writes all the stuff, you know, and then Roger sings it, and so the combination of the two of them, it still has that unmistakable hallmark of the Who.
And how did you fit into that particular piece?
Pretty well, because I play very accurately, and so does Pete. Both of us play very percussively. He's a very percussive guitar player, and I'm a very percussive bass player. Although I have to say, in that particular song, there wasn't a lot of banging around, but it was a good experience and a pleasant experience to work with him. And we cut the song pretty quick. It was cut in a day, and that was it. And it was great. And funnily enough, the on drums was Zach Starkey. And that was nice, because I just finished the tour with Ringo. I'd just come from playing with his dad, you know. P is extraordinarily talented musician. You know, really knowledgeable, broad musical knowledge. A lot broader than people would think. Orchestral, understands orchestral, big band, you know. He's a very deep musician in that sense, deep knowledge, you know. And you can see by the scope of the things that he's written over his lifetime that, you know, he obviously thinks a lot about what he does, and he's a very innovative artist. And that's really all I can tell you. Is Pete is a very calm guy. He goes about his stuff in a quiet way. You know, he's a perfectionist. All the things you would expect, really. He's a perfectionist, and he's a dynamic musician. That is the one thing that you realise very quickly with Pete. He's very dynamic. You know, it's not just middle of the road, or you know, a lot of very sharp things, and then it'll be very smooth for a while, and then punctuation, you know. So he's a very dynamic musician. And that is, of course, when you listen to all the Who records, that's where that dynamics comes from.
So you just mentioned touring with Ringo and his all-star band.
Yeah.
What was that experience like for you?
Oh, well, it was fantastic, because, you know, I grew up on the Beatles. They were an early influence. And so, you know, it was playing with one of my heroes, really, from that perspective. But, you know, again, with Ringo, playing with him was a real eye-opener, because before I worked with Richie, my impression of him was that he was this loose guy, sort of happy-go-lucky, bit floppy, great backbeat, you know. When I worked with him, I realized just how much of a disciplinarian he is, and how hard he works, how much he's really into the music. Not only his music or the Beatles' music, but, you know, any music he plays, he's really serious about it, and really dedicated to getting it right. And it made me realize how big of a part he played in the Beatles' music, and the Beatles generally, a lot bigger than people imagine. You know, he was a far bigger influence in the Beatles than people would ever realize, I think. A lot of the rhythm stuff, you know, he had a lot of input in it, and was not just this sort of happy-go-lucky guy at the back who was shaking his head and doing that. He was a very clever thinker, Ringo. So that was one kind of shock I got with him, that he was, you know. And then I started to immediately see why the Beatles were as good as they were, you know. It's, of course, you know, you listen to McCartney's songwriting, or John's songwriting, or, you know, the soul with which John Lennon sings. And you can see why the Beatles are what they are. But of course, when you marry that to something like Ringo, then you go back. If you listen to any of the Beatles records, and you stop listening for a second to the main melody, or to the harmonies, or to the singing, and you just focus on the rhythm that's going on the percussion, on the drums. They're fantastic. They're fantastic. I mean, I don't believe, had the Beatles had a different drummer, I don't think they would have been as big as they were. I have to say that. So that was my first impression of Ringo, is that he was much bigger a character, much bigger a player, and a bigger musician than I had ever thought he was.
What was it like to have Ringo play drums on two of your pieces you performed?
Fantastic. Yeah, it's lovely. And even more lovely to play bass on his songs, you know. But he's got a great feel. You know, it's this beautiful, slightly late offbeat. It's just not late, but it's just on the back of the beat rather than the forward of the beat. Carl Palmer's is on the forward of the beat, you know. He's first in, you know. But Ringo, he's just slightly bang, and it comes down. Just the feel is so solid. That was it. And he's a wonderful human being, Ringo. He's been through an awful lot in his life. He's seen a lot, done a lot, been there, done it. He's been to hell and back on his own personal drugs journey, or whatever you will, and he recovered from that. And he's such a wise person, I think now, you know. And he means what he says. Peace and love. That's Ringo. You could sum Ringo up with those two words. That's him, really.
ELP's back catalog has been reissued many, many times in many configurations in recent years.
Yes.
What's your role in that process, and do you feel it's been done right yet?
Well, I don't have an awful lot. Well, you know, when they repackage a thing, they tend to remaster it. They send you the covers. Is this all right? Is that all right? You know, I don't really have a lot. After you've made a record, you don't really have too much to do with it, to be honest with you. Apart from the odd approvals, you know, you're not really involved in it very much. It's just a record company repackaging it so they can put it out and sell some new copies to new people, hopefully. The one thing I would like to do, which I feel has never been done, is a proper, in-depth documentary on the life of ELP, on the musical life of ELP. I don't think one has ever really been done, not a good one. Yeah, I believe there's still room for a really good, in-depth life story of ELP. We have been talking about it, and it's something that I think would be worth doing.
Well, what do you feel has not been captured about your story?
I don't think that, you know, what a lot has been focused on with ELP is either the more sort of pretentious aspect, how much equipment they've got, you know, and this, or how much they squabble together, you know. But in reality, the truth of it is, there was a lot of beauty and joy in ELP, a lot of great moments, a lot of creative joy, fabulous chemistry. I just don't think that's been captured. I don't believe anybody's really made a film which captures the greatness of ELP. To the extent that, I mean the greatness of the music, really. It was very special music. And I just don't feel that anyone's ever captured the story behind the music, if I could put it that way.
Two other things that have just been reissued are the Emerson, Lake and Powell Sprocket sessions and any live recording. And how do you look back at that particular lineup?
Well, it was a good band. It was certainly a good band with Cozy. I don't think, you know, I don't think Cozy was the right drummer for Keith and I. He was a very powerful drummer, which in some ways was good from some musical standpoints from Keith and my perspective. But in some ways, I think he lacked the sort of more jazz finesse at times that maybe would have been good for other aspects of the music. But, you know, everybody's got their thing, and Cozy was great at that sort of very powerful rock drumming. And so we gained in that way. And when it was really, when that band was flying along, it was impressive. And so that was my memory of it, really.
Is it true that there's parts of a second album that never came out?
There are, I believe, tracks that we wrote that never came out, yes. I don't know if they're lost. We just never released them. You know, I mean, not everything you write is good enough to release. Or at least it looks like that way at the time, you know. Sometimes you might go back and you think, oh, that was actually quite good. Why did we never release it? You know, and that often happens. Well, you know, if somebody comes up and finds a demo recording somewhere and of stuff that was just, you know, sometimes we'd sit in the studio all day and just tinker around looking for ideas, and you'd listen, and all of a sudden, you know, Keith would write something. And now I look back and I think that's fantastic. Why did we not pick up on it? You know? But that was then and now is now. You see, you listen with different ears now than you had there at that time.
You were actually in Asia at one point, weren't you?
I was, for my sins, yeah. Right. I did it as a favour to Carl. He called me up one night and he said, Greg, man, he said, I wonder if you could do me a favour. And I thought he wanted to borrow a guitar or something. So I said, yeah, sure, man, what do you want? He said, I wonder if you could come over and play with Aisha for a couple of weeks in Japan, because we've just fallen out with John Wetton, and we've got no singer, and the shows are booked, and they'd apparently booked this 747 jet to take the prize winners of an MTV competition, and none of it could be cancelled, so the thing had to go on, you know. Oh dear. So I said, when is it? He said, it's in 3 weeks' time. I said, no, Carl, you can't be serious, man. I can't do it in 3 weeks' time. Yeah, we got to, and we got to do it, you know. So that was what happened, and it got done in the end. It did. They're a funny bunch, Aisha. Well, they were at that time, you know. It was a strange band at that time. I think they're more settled now. You know, everyone was firing everyone at that time. You know, it was a huge conspiracy. You know, you'd walk down the corridor and there'd be people plotting to fire each other as in each room you walk past. You know, it was hilarious. Yes, I did do a brief stint with them.
I take it you just did not see a long-term fit there.
I did not want to make commercial music in that sense. They were going in that sort of corporate rock direction, and I didn't want to be a part of that. So, I didn't believe in that sort of music, really.
Another interesting element of the ELP story is coming back to the fore in that the Manticore label back catalog is being reissued by Esoteric in pretty much its entirety. I'm curious, how do you look back at your days co-helming that label?
It was a very good idea at the time, Manticore, because it was going to try to bring bands through that couldn't get a deal for one reason or another, because they were too much niche market, or, you know, so the oddities that major labels, at that time anyway, weren't keen on signing. The problem with it was that ELP was so, our time was so in such demand that we really couldn't devote ourselves to running a label properly. And so it was a very noble idea. It was a good idea. And we are still, believe it or not, we're still friendly with some of the artists who were on the label, and some of them still exist. There's an act called PFM, an Italian act. The full name is Premiata Forneria Marconi, which means first-class bread shop in Italian. And they are still going to this day. So, you know, we were definitely right in our choice of acts to support, because they have stood the test of time. And so but that was the story of Manticore. It was an attempt by us to create an environment for artists that would not have an easy start through the recording industry. That was the idea behind it. I like history. I'm a lover of history, and I think there's a lot to be learned by history, especially good history. If something's really, was good or meaningful, had some meaning at the time, then I think it is worth preserving, and I think it has a value. I really do. I'm sure long after I'm dead and gone, people will, poke around in record catalogues and say, oh, look, here's a recording of that Pete Sinfield album called Still. Some beautiful things on it. So there are fascinating little aspects to this, which if you're, for example, if you're an ELP fan or you want to go into the history of that, all of those little umbilical cords connect together. And there's a story that permeates throughout the entire sort of lineage of King Crimson, me and Pete Sinfield, Keith Christmas, all throughout the entire Manticore, ELP. It's like a huge family tree, and so that people can see the relevance and how things actually happened. So I think from that point of view, historical recordings are pretty good things.